Hello, dear listeners. Before we begin this beautiful story of love and hope, tell me, where are you listening from today? Leave it in the comments. I love knowing where all the hearts that follow this channel are tuning in from. Each message from you inspires me to keep telling stories that touch the soul. Now then, let's begin today's story. The knock on the door was sharp, insistent, and entirely out of place. It was a sound that belonged to the bright, orderly hours of the day, not to the 10 o'clock quiet of Lily Barnes's modest apartment building. She paused, her hand hovering over the worn spine of a book, her heart giving a sudden, nervous flutter. No one ever came to her door this late. She opened it to a sight so jarring, so utterly unexpected, that for a moment she thought she was dreaming. Christian Fairmont, her boss, the CEO of Fairmont Enterprises, stood on her worn welcome mat. He was a man she was used to seeing behind a vast mahogany desk, encased in the armor of a perfectly tailored suit. But the man before her was different. His tie was loosened, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. His usually immaculate brown hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had been raking his hands through it. His green eyes, normally so cool and analytical, were shadowed with a tension that seemed to vibrate in the dim hallway light. He looked not like a billionaire CEO, but like a man on the edge of a cliff. "Lily," he said, his voice a low, strained sound that was nothing like the confident baritone he used in the boardroom. "I need a favor that goes beyond anything I have ever asked of you." The air in the small entryway crackled with the unspoken. This was not a request for a rescheduled meeting or a last-minute report. This was something else entirely. She stepped back, allowing him to enter, her mind racing. He moved past her, the familiar expensive scent of his cologne, sandalwood and clean linen, filling her small living room and making it feel even smaller. He paced the length of her rug, a caged predator in a space meant for quiet solitude. "Mr. Ishikawa confirmed his attendance at the annual shareholders' dinner tomorrow night," he began, getting straight to the point. His voice was tight. "He's flying in from Tokyo. The deal for the Pacific merger hinges on his investment." Lily nodded, her professional instincts kicking in despite the strangeness of the situation. She knew the Ishikawa deal was massive, a billion-dollar negotiation that Christian had been working on for months. "That's wonderful news, Christian," she said softly. He stopped pacing and turned to face her, a bitter, humorless smile touching his lips. "No, it's a disaster." He took a deep breath, the sound ragged. "Ishikawa is traditional, extremely so. He believes that a man's stability in his personal life reflects his stability in business. He believes serious men are family men." He let the words hang in the air. Lily felt a cold knot of understanding form in her stomach. Christian Fairmont, at 30, was one of the city's most eligible and untouchable bachelors. His focus was singular: the company. "He made a comment to my COO in Tokyo," Christian continued, his jaw tight. "He said he was looking forward to meeting the woman who had captured the heart of such a formidable man. He assumed that a man in my position at my age would be settled." Lily's mind immediately went into problem-solving mode, the way it always did when he presented her with a challenge. She expected his next words. He needed a date, an elegant, professional escort who could play a convincing role for an evening. It was unorthodox, but not impossible. She could make some calls, find someone discreet and suitable. "I can arrange for a suitable companion," she began, her voice calm and even. "Someone from a reputable agency, fully vetted." "No." The word was sharp, cutting her off. He took a step closer, and for the first time since she had known him, Lily saw a flicker of raw vulnerability in his eyes. It was a crack in the fortress, and it was aimed directly at her. "I don't trust anyone else for this, Lily," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "A stranger could make a mistake, say the wrong thing. No one knows my schedule, my preferences, my life the way you do. You organize every minute of my day. You know what I eat, what I read, what I hate. You know me better than anyone." He paused, his gaze intense, searching her face. The air grew thick, heavy with the weight of his next words. "I need you to pretend to be my wife. Just for one night." The request landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. Lily's breath caught in her throat. Her mind went completely blank. Wife? The word was absurd. Alien. It was a role so far removed from her reality that she couldn't even begin to process it. She stared at him, speechless, a wave of dizziness washing over her. Her world was her small apartment, her quiet life, the long drives on weekends to the countryside to sit with her grandmother. His world was one of private jets and billion-dollar deals. The two were not meant to intersect, not like this. She was about to refuse. The word was forming on her lips. It was impossible, insane. Her quiet, orderly life would be thrown into chaos. She thought of her grandmother, of the peaceful, simple values she had been taught. This felt like a lie too big to tell. As if reading her mind, his expression softened, the desperation in his eyes deepening. He took another step closer, his voice now a low, pleading murmur that was meant for her alone. "I know about your grandmother," he said softly. The words stopped her cold. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I know about the medical bills," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "The cost of her care, the new experimental treatment her doctor recommended. I know it's why you work so much, why you never take a day off." He saw the flicker of shocked pride and pain in her eyes and pressed on, his voice gentle but firm. "I can make it all go away, Lily, all of it. The debt, the future costs. I can ensure she has the best care, the best doctors, for the rest of her life. Everything will be taken care of. Forever." He held her gaze, his own eyes filled with a desperate sincerity. "Please," he whispered, the single word stripped of all his usual authority, leaving only the raw plea of a man who had run out of options. "Just for one night." The next morning, the air in the executive suite of Fairmont Enterprises was electric. The low, respectful hum of the office felt different, charged with a new, unspoken tension that seemed to emanate directly from Christian's closed office door. Lily sat at her desk, her fingers poised over her keyboard, but her mind was miles away. Every time the intercom buzzed, her heart leaped into her throat. The memory of him standing in her apartment, a desperate plea in his eyes, felt like a fever dream. At precisely 9 o'clock, the intercom chimed. "Lily, could you come in, please?" His voice was back to its usual crisp, professional tone, but she could detect a faint, underlying strain. She rose, her legs feeling unsteady. As she walked toward his office, she felt the weight of a dozen curious stares on her back. Christian's door was almost always open, a symbol of his transparent, hands-on leadership. When she entered, he closed it behind her. The soft, definitive click of the lock echoed in the silent room, shutting out the rest of the world. The whispers in the hallway were almost audible. He did not sit behind his desk. Instead, he stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to the sprawling city below. On the polished surface of his conference table lay a sleek, black folder. "I've prepared a file," he said, his voice all business. He was back in his armor, the cool, controlled CEO. "It contains the essential details of our story." He opened the folder. Inside were neatly typed pages, bullet points organized with the ruthless efficiency she knew so well. He began to recite the facts as if briefing her for a merger. "We met 2 years ago at a charity art gala. You were there with a friend. I was immediately taken by your quiet intelligence." He glanced at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "We married 1 year ago, a small private ceremony, only immediate family. We kept it secret to protect our privacy from the media." He detailed their supposed first date, their favorite restaurant, a fictional trip to Italy. It was a clinical, sterile account of a life they had never lived. He was treating their fabricated marriage like a business plan, a series of facts to be memorized and recited. He was trying to build a fortress of logic around a situation that was anything but. Lily listened quietly, her hands clasped in front of her. She let him finish, her gaze steady. When he was done, a heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the distant sound of city traffic. He looked at her, expecting her to nod, to start memorizing her lines. Instead, she shook her head, a small, gentle motion. "This won't work," she said softly. Christian's brow furrowed. It's all there. The timeline is consistent. The details are plausible. It's not about the facts, Christian, she replied, her voice gaining a quiet strength. She took a step toward the table, toward him. It's about the feeling. Mr. Ishikawa and his wife are not auditors. They are people. They won't be looking for consistency in our story. They will be looking for the truth in our eyes. She looked at him, her gaze direct and unflinching. They will look for the way you touch the small of my back. They will watch for the way I smile when you speak. No one will believe we are married if we look like two strangers reciting a script. They won't believe it if there isn't a real story behind our glances. He was taken aback, his professional composure faltering. He stared at her, truly seeing the depth of her perception. He had been so focused on the what that he had completely ignored the how. She was right. His logical plan had a fatal emotional flaw. A new confidence settled over Lily. She had spent her life observing, understanding the quiet, unspoken needs of others. She understood what this charade required. It required a foundation, however fragile, of something real. She straightened her shoulders, a subtle shift in power occurring between them. We need more than a dossier, she stated, her voice calm but firm. We need memories, even if we have to make them. Christian looked at her, his green eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning respect. He, the man who commanded boardrooms and orchestrated billion-dollar deals, was at a complete loss. So, she continued, a faint, challenging smile on her lips. Let's start today. Take me to dinner tonight, not as your assistant, not as a business arrangement. She held his gaze, the command in her quiet words undeniable. Take me to dinner as your husband. Christian Fairmont, the man who always had an answer, was left utterly speechless. He watched as his quiet, unassuming assistant took his perfectly crafted plan and rewrote the rules. In that moment, he realized with a jolt that he was no longer in control of this dangerous game. She was. The doorbell rang at precisely 7:30. When Lily opened it, Christian stood there, and for a dizzying moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. He was not the tense, disheveled man from the other night, nor the clinical CEO from the office. He was dressed in a dark gray suit, the fabric perfectly tailored to his frame, but he wore it without the usual stiffness of a business meeting. He held a single, long-stemmed white rose in his hand. His eyes met hers, and then they traveled down, taking in the simple navy blue dress she wore. It was a dress she had owned for years, modest and elegant, but the way he looked at her made her feel as if she were wearing haute couture. A slow heat crept up her neck. He wasn't looking at his efficient assistant anymore. He was looking at a woman. The air in the doorway grew thick, charged with this new, unspoken awareness. Lily, he said, his voice a low murmur. He seemed to be searching for words, a rare occurrence for him. He cleared his throat. You look lovely. He offered her the rose, his fingers brushing against hers as she took it. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a tiny jolt of electricity through her veins. The dinner was awkward at first. They were seated at a quiet corner table in a restaurant so exclusive Lily had only ever read about it in magazines. The low light and hushed atmosphere felt intensely intimate. By habit, they fell into their usual rhythm. He asked about the next day's schedule. She reminded him of a conference call he needed to prepare for. After a few minutes of this, Lily gently placed her hand on his arm, a gesture of quiet interruption. His muscles tensed under her touch before he consciously relaxed. Christian, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not your assistant tonight, and you are not my boss. She withdrew her hand, but the warmth of her touch lingered on his skin. Tell me something that no one at the office knows about you. He looked startled, as if she had asked him to reveal a state secret. He hesitated, swirling the wine in his glass. The silence stretched, and she thought he might refuse. But then he looked up, his gaze distant, a flicker of old passion in his eyes. Before I took over the company, he began, his voice quiet. I wanted to be an architect. I used to spend hours sketching buildings, designing spaces. My father, he believed it was a frivolous pursuit. When he passed away, there was no choice. The company came first. He spoke of lines and structures, of light and shadow, with a passion she had never heard from him before. The distant, powerful CEO dissolved, and in his place was a young man who had sacrificed a dream for duty. The revelation was a small, intimate gift, and it made her heart ache for him in a way that felt dangerous. "What about you, Lily?" he asked, turning the question back to her. "What is your dream?" She felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "It's silly, really." "Tell me," he insisted, his voice gentle. "I love to bake," she confessed. "My grandmother taught me. My dream has always been to open a small cafe in her town. A cozy little place with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh bread where people can come to feel at home." He listened, his expression rapt, his green eyes fixed on her. He wasn't just hearing the words, he was seeing the picture she painted. He saw her in a sunlit kitchen, her hands dusted with flour, a genuine smile on her face. The image of the hyper-efficient, almost invisible assistant who managed his life was shattering, piece by piece. In its place was this woman, full of quiet warmth and sweet, simple dreams. He realized, with a startling clarity, that he had worked with her for 2 years, and he had never truly seen her before. The drive home was filled with a comfortable, easy silence. The awkwardness had evaporated, replaced by a fragile, tentative connection. He walked her to her door, the single white rose now resting in a small vase on her entryway table. Under the dim light of the hallway, he paused. The script for the night was over. This was uncharted territory. An impulse, foreign and undeniable, took over. He leaned in, his movements slow, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. He pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her cheek. His lips were warm, gentle. It was a gesture that was not in any dossier, not part of any plan. "Good night, Lily," he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. He pulled back, and the look in his eyes was one of dazed surprise, as if he couldn't believe what he had just done. "Good night, Christian," she replied, her own voice a breathless whisper. He turned and walked away quickly, his retreat almost frantic. Lily stepped inside her apartment and closed the door, her fingers rising to touch the spot on her cheek where his lips had been. Her skin tingled. Her heart was pounding a wild, erratic rhythm against her ribs. It was just a kiss on the cheek, a simple, friendly gesture. But it felt like a lie. And terrifyingly, it also felt like the truest thing that had happened all night. On Saturday morning, Christian's gleaming black sedan, a vehicle built for pristine city asphalt, looked conspicuously out of place as it navigated a winding country road. Dust kicked up from the tires, coating the polished exterior in a fine brown powder. He gripped the leather steering wheel, his knuckles white, a frown creasing his brow as he dodged a pothole. "Are you sure this is the right way?" he asked, his voice tight with a discomfort he was trying to hide. He was a man who thrived on maps, on certainty, on knowing his exact destination. This was the opposite of his world. Lily, seated beside him, simply smiled. The frantic energy of the city had melted away from her the further they drove. Here, surrounded by rolling green hills and endless blue sky, she seemed more herself, more at ease. "We're almost there," she said. "Welcome to my world, Christian." He pulled up to a small white house with a sprawling front porch and a garden bursting with colorful, unruly flowers. An elderly woman with kind eyes and a smile that was an exact echo of Lily's was waiting on the porch swing. This was her grandmother, Eleanor. The moment Christian stepped out of the car, he felt as though he had crossed into another dimension. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and baking bread, a stark contrast to the city's sterile metallic scent. Eleanor greeted him not with a handshake, but with a warm, enveloping hug that took him completely by surprise. "So, you're the young man who finally captured my Lily's heart," Eleanor said, her eyes twinkling with a shrewd, knowing light. "I was beginning to think she'd spend the rest of her life organizing someone else's." Christian felt a flush of guilt creep up his neck. The lie felt heavier here, more profane in the face of this genuine, uncomplicated warmth. "Eleanor, oblivious to the charade, treated him not as a billionaire CEO, but as a welcome addition to the family. She put him to work. Before he knew it, he had taken off his expensive jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and was hammering a loose board back into the porch fence. The physical labor was foreign, grounding. His hands, usually occupied with signing documents or tapping on a keyboard, felt clumsy with the hammer. But the simple, satisfying thud of the nail driving into the wood was more rewarding than any deal he had ever closed. Later, he found himself sitting on the porch swing, a plate of still warm apple cake on his lap, listening to Eleanor tell stories about Lily's childhood. He learned about the little girl who sold homemade lemonade to raise money for a stray dog, the teenager who read classic novels aloud to her when her eyesight began to fail. He was seeing the blueprint of the woman beside him, the foundation of her quiet strength and boundless kindness. As the afternoon sun began to dip below the hills, casting long golden shadows across the yard, Eleanor took Christian's hand in her own. Her skin was soft, papery, but her grip was surprisingly firm. "You have kind eyes, Christian," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I worried about her in that big, lonely city. Take good care of my granddaughter. She has the purest heart I know." The words, spoken with such innocent, unwavering trust, struck him with the force of a physical blow. The weight of his deception settled in his gut, heavy and cold. This was no longer about impressing an investor. He was lying to this sweet, trusting woman, exploiting her granddaughter's good nature for his own gain. A profound sense of shame washed over him. The drive back to the city was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence than the one they had shared after their dinner. This one was thick with unspoken emotion. As he pulled up to her apartment building, Lily turned to him, her expression soft in the fading light. "Thank you for doing that, Christian," she said, her voice full of genuine gratitude. "It meant a lot to me. And to her." He shut off the engine and turned to face her fully. The mask of the CEO was gone, replaced by a raw, unguarded honesty that startled her. "Lily," he began, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "Your grandmother. She made me feel more at home in 3 hours than I've felt in my own penthouse in years." The confession hung in the charged space between them. It was more intimate than a kiss, more revealing than any secret he could have shared. It was a truth that went far beyond the boundaries of their arrangement, a truth that neither of them dared to acknowledge, yet both of them felt deep in their bones. "We need rings." Christian made the declaration on Monday morning with the same detached tone he would use to announce a budget meeting. He stood before her desk, his hands in his pockets, the picture of cool authority. But Lily could see the faint, almost imperceptible tension in his jaw. The weekend had changed something between them. The memory of her grandmother's porch, of his quiet confession, lingered in the air, a ghost of intimacy in the sterile office environment. "A wedding band is a crucial detail," he continued, his voice a low command. "We'll go after work. I've made an appointment." That evening, he led her to a jewelry store so exclusive it didn't have a sign. The name, whispered among the city's elite, was simply Ore. Inside, the world was hushed, a sanctuary of soft carpets, velvet displays, and shimmering light. A distinguished silver-haired jeweler greeted them with a deferential bow. "Mr. Fairmont, a pleasure to see you again. And this must be the lovely Mrs. Fairmont." The title, spoken so naturally by a stranger, sent a strange shiver down Lily's spine. Christian, to his credit, didn't flinch. He slid his hand to the small of her back, a gesture that was both possessive and protective, guiding her toward a private viewing area. His touch was light, but it burned through the fabric of her dress. "We are looking for wedding bands," Christian announced, his voice smooth as silk. He was playing the part of the devoted husband flawlessly. The jeweler presented a tray lined with black velvet, an array of platinum and gold rings glittering under the soft lights. Christian bypassed the more ornate, diamond-encrusted options, his eyes scanning for something simpler, more elegant. He selected a slender platinum band, its surface polished to a mirror shine. "May I?" he asked, his voice a low murmur directed at Lily. She nodded, her throat suddenly dry. He took her left hand in his. His fingers were warm, his grip firm and steady. The simple act of him holding her hand felt shockingly intimate in the quiet, opulent room. The world seemed to narrow to that single point of contact, his skin against hers. He slowly slid the cool, heavy metal onto her fourth finger. Her breath hitched. He didn't let go. He held her hand, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles as he examined the ring. "What do you think?" he asked, his gaze lifting to meet hers. His green eyes were dark, intense. He wasn't asking for her opinion on the ring. He was asking something else entirely, something deeper, something she didn't have an answer for. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We'll take this one," Christian said to the jeweler, his voice decisive. The jeweler smiled warmly. "An excellent choice. And will there be an inscription?" Lily expected Christian to say no, to deem it an unnecessary detail for their one-night charade. Instead, he looked directly at Lily, a strange, unreadable light in his eyes. The air grew still. "Yes," Christian said, his voice clear and steady, never breaking eye contact with her. "Just one word. Always." The word struck Lily with the force of a physical impact. Always. It was a word of permanence, of promises, of forevers. It was a word that had no place in their temporary, fragile agreement. It was not in the script. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm. What was he doing? He took the ring from her finger to hand it to the jeweler, and her hand suddenly felt cold, bereft. A few minutes later, the jeweler returned. "It is done." Christian took the ring. He turned back to Lily, his expression serious, almost solemn. He took her hand again, his touch sending another shiver through her. Slowly, deliberately, he slid the ring back onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He held her gaze, his thumb once again caressing her skin. The world outside the small, velvet-lined room seemed to melt away. There was only the weight of the ring on her finger, the warmth of his hand holding hers, and the profound, terrifying question in his eyes. The jeweler, sensing a private moment, beamed. A perfect match. The phrase, so simple, so innocent, hung in the air between them. A perfect match. It was a statement about a ring and a finger. But in the charged silence of the room, it felt like a prophecy. They both heard the double meaning, and it left them standing there side by side, shaken and utterly silent. Ishikawa is a devotee of classical music. There will be dancing. Christian's announcement on Wednesday afternoon was delivered with his usual clipped efficiency, but Lily saw the subtle unease in his eyes. This was a variable he couldn't control with a spreadsheet. That evening, long after the last employee had gone home, he led her to the main boardroom. The vast, polished table had been pushed against the wall, transforming the space into a cavernous, empty ballroom. The only light came from the glittering cityscape outside the panoramic windows. He placed his phone on the empty table, and the soft, melancholic notes of a Chopin waltz filled the silence. The sound, so beautiful and romantic, felt deeply out of place in the heart of his corporate empire. He turned to her, his posture stiff, his expression serious. "I assume you know the basic steps of a waltz?" "A little," she admitted, her voice small in the large room. "Good." He stepped forward, extending a hand. "Let's begin." The first few attempts were a disaster. He was a rigid, technical instructor, counting the steps aloud in a low, monotonous voice. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. "Your left foot, Lily." His hand on her back was stiff, his grip on her hand clinical. He was leading her as if he were executing a business maneuver, all logic and no feeling. Overwhelmed by his proximity and her own nervousness, Lily felt clumsy, her feet tangling with his. She stepped on his polished shoe for the third time and pulled away in frustration. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I can't do this." "Just relax, Lily," he said, a hint of impatience in his voice. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Just feel the music." His words, meant to be encouraging, only made her feel more inadequate. She looked at him, standing there so perfectly composed, and a spark of her quiet strength returned. He didn't understand. "No," she said, her voice firmer now. "That's not the problem." She took a deep breath and stepped back into his space, her resolve hardening. A dance isn't about steps, Christian. It's not a formula. It's about trust. Before he could react, she took his right hand and placed it firmly on her waist, the warmth of his palm seeping through the thin fabric of her blouse. She then took his other hand and laced her fingers through his. Her touch was no longer hesitant. It was deliberate, confident. "Stop counting," she commanded softly. "Stop leading. Just for a moment. Follow me. Trust me to follow you." He looked down at her, startled by her sudden audacity. He saw the challenge in her eyes, the quiet determination. For a man who had spent his entire life leading, the concept of ceding control was alien. He hesitated, his body still rigid. "Trust me," she whispered again. Something in her voice, in the unwavering sincerity of her gaze, broke through his defenses. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He stopped counting. He relaxed his shoulders. He let go. The moment he surrendered, everything changed. She guided them back into the rhythm of the waltz, and this time, it was effortless. They moved as one. His body, no longer fighting for control, responded to her subtle cues. Her steps, no longer faltering, matched his perfectly. He was no longer a CEO, and she was no longer his assistant. They were simply a man and a woman, lost in the fluid, graceful motion of the dance. The city lights blurred into a glittering tapestry around them, a silent audience to their private performance. He spun her out, then drew her back in, her body fitting against his, as if it were made to be there. The final lingering notes of the waltz faded into silence. But they didn't move. They stood frozen in the center of the vast, empty boardroom, still locked in a dancer's embrace. Her hand was on his shoulder, his on her waist. The silence was deafening, filled with the sound of their own ragged breathing. His green eyes, dark and stormy in the dim light, stared down into hers. Their faces were inches apart. The space between them was a live wire, humming with a current of unspoken desire. It would be so easy to close the distance, to lean in, to taste. The thought was a silent confession that passed between them, a shared, terrifying understanding. The air grew thick, heavy with the weight of a kiss that was waiting to happen. The night before the shareholders' dinner, a palpable tension hummed through the office. Lily found herself working late, finalizing the last-minute details for the event. The building was quiet, most employees having already left. As she passed Christian's office, she noticed the light was still on. She paused, her hand hovering, ready to knock, but stopped when she saw him through the sliver of the open door. He wasn't working. He was standing by his desk, his back to the door, staring down at a small, silver picture frame. His shoulders, which he always held with such rigid military precision, were slumped. He looked burdened, solitary. The image of the powerful CEO was gone, replaced by the silhouette of a lonely man. She knocked softly on the doorframe. "Christian," he startled, his head snapping up. He quickly placed the frame face down on his desk, but it was too late. He turned to face her, his expression guarded, the walls of his composure hastily being rebuilt. "Lily, I thought you had gone home." "Just finishing up," she said, her voice gentle. She gestured toward the desk. "I didn't mean to intrude." He followed her gaze to the overturned frame. A heavy silence fell between them. He seemed to be wrestling with himself, his jaw tight. In the past, he would have dismissed her with a curt nod, ending the conversation. But the dance, the trip to her grandmother's, the shared intimacy of the last few days, it had changed the space between them. He let out a long, slow breath and reached for the frame, turning it over. The photo was of a man with kind eyes and a wide, warm smile, an older version of Christian. "My father," Christian said, his voice low and rough. Lily walked further into the room, stopping on the other side of his massive desk. She didn't speak, simply waited, giving him the space to continue if he chose to. "He built this company from nothing. Christian said, his gaze fixed on the photograph. A small loan and a big dream. He poured his entire life, his soul, into these walls. He was a force of nature. Everyone loved him. He paused, a shadow of pain crossing his face. His heart gave out when he was 55. One day he was here, the next, gone. I was 24. He finally looked up from the photo, his eyes meeting hers. The vulnerability she saw there made her heart ache. I live in constant fear of failing him, he confessed, the words a quiet torrent. Every decision I make, every risk I take, I feel this immense pressure to live up to his legacy, to not be the son who destroyed everything his father loved. Sometimes the weight of it's suffocating. He had never spoken to her like this. He had never spoken to anyone like this. He was showing her the deep, hidden wound beneath his armor of success and control. Lily listened, her heart swelling with a profound empathy. She didn't offer him empty platitudes or pity. She saw his pain, and she met it with a simple, unwavering truth. Your father didn't build this company to be a burden to you, Christian, she said, her voice soft but firm, imbued with a certainty that seemed to cut through his fear. He built it to be a foundation. You're not living in his shadow. You're building on top of what he started. You've taken his legacy and made it global. What you've done, it's incredible. Her words were not flattery. They were a simple, honest validation from the one person who had a front-row seat to his relentless dedication. She saw the work, the sacrifice, the lonely hours. And she wasn't impressed by the success. She respected the effort. His composure finally broke. He stared at her, his green eyes shimmering with an emotion he so rarely allowed himself to feel. No one had ever seen the pressure as anything but a privilege. No one had ever acknowledged the burden. No one had ever simply said, "You're doing a good job." A single traitorous tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly, but she had seen it. "Thank you, Lily," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed emotion. In that moment, the last vestiges of their professional relationship crumbled into dust. She was no longer his assistant, the woman who managed his schedule. She was his confidant. She was the only person in the world who seemed to understand the weight on his soul, and for him, that realization was more terrifying and more essential than any business deal he had ever chased. The night of the dinner arrived like a storm front, the air thick with anticipation and a low, humming dread. Lily stood before the mirror in her apartment, looking at a stranger. The woman staring back at her was wrapped in a gown of deep sapphire silk, a dress Christian had sent over that afternoon without a word. It clung to her figure in a way that was both elegant and daring. Her hair was swept up, exposing the graceful line of her neck, and a delicate diamond necklace, also from him, labeled simply, "For tonight," rested against her collarbone. She was a work of art, a beautiful illusion. When she descended to the lobby of her building, he was waiting. He stood near the entrance, a striking figure in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. He turned as he heard her approach, and the polite professional mask he wore for the world simply fell away. His mouth parted slightly. His green eyes widened, conducting a slow, sweeping survey from the top of her head to the tips of her silk heels. He didn't just see the dress, he saw her. "Lily," he breathed, his voice a raw, husky sound she had never heard before. He took a step toward her, his gaze full of a raw, unguarded admiration. "You are—" He stopped, unable to find a word sufficient for the sight of her. He simply shook his head, a look of stunned wonder on his face. The ride to the hotel was a cocoon of tense silence. The air in the back of the town car was heavy, charged with the electricity of their shared purpose and the unspoken feelings that swirled between them. Lily's hands were trembling in her lap. She felt Christian's hand cover hers. "Nervous?" he asked, his voice a low murmur beside her. She looked at their joined hands, his strong and warm, completely enveloping hers. "Only if you are," she whispered. He gave her hand a gentle, reassuring squeeze. "With you by my side? Not a chance." The gesture, the words, They no longer felt like part of an act. They met Mr. Ishikawa and his wife, a graceful, smiling couple in the hotel's grand dining hall. The performance began. It was flawless. They were a symphony of shared glances, inside jokes they had created over the past week, and easy, believable affection. He would rest his hand on the small of her back, and she would lean into his touch naturally. She would laugh at a story he told, her eyes sparkling with a light that was not entirely feigned. They were so convincing that at times they almost convinced themselves. During a lull in the conversation, Mrs. Ishikawa leaned toward Lily, her expression warm and curious. "My husband is a very astute judge of character, but he is a man," she said with a soft laugh. "He sees the successful partnership. I am more interested in the heart. Tell me, Lily-san, what was the one thing that made you fall in love with your husband?" The question was a landmine. Lily's heart stopped. The script had no answer for this. She felt Christian tense beside her. She turned her head, her eyes finding his across the table. She looked at him, the man who had confessed his deepest fears to her, the man who had looked at her moments ago as if she were the only woman in the world. A genuine, unbidden emotion swelled in her chest. "It was the way he saw me," Lily answered, her voice soft and thick, with a truth that stunned them both. In a world that was always rushing, he was the first person to ever really stop and see me, as if I was the only person in the room. The honesty of her answer hung in the air, a beautiful, shimmering thing. She saw the shock in Christian's eyes, followed by a wave of profound, heart-stopping emotion. Later, as the evening wound down, Christian guided her toward a dimly lit terrace overlooking the city. "Ishikawa is watching from the window," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. His hand tightened on her waist, pulling her closer until her body was flush against his. "We need to make this look real." She looked up at him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The city lights blurred behind him. He was all she could see. He lowered his head, his eyes searching hers in the darkness. "For the deal," he murmured, as if trying to convince himself as much as her. And then he kissed her. It started as a performance, a gentle pressure of lips for the benefit of their audience. But in a heartbeat, it ignited. The weeks of simmering tension, of stolen glances, of unspoken desires, erupted. The charade burned away, consumed by a desperate, undeniable reality. His hand moved from her waist to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, pulling her closer still. Her arms wrapped around his neck, her body melting into his. This was not a kiss for the cameras. It was deep, passionate, and utterly consuming. It was the desperate kiss of a man starved for something real, and the answering kiss of a woman who had fallen hopelessly in love. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. The line had not just been blurred, it had been completely and irrevocably erased. The ride home was a universe of silence. The air in the car, once charged with electric anticipation, was now heavy and suffocating. The ghost of their kiss on the terrace lingered between them, a tangible presence that neither of them knew how to address. It had been a moment of pure, unadulterated truth in a night built on lies, and now the silence was the price. Christian stared out his window at the blur of city lights, his jaw set like stone. Lily stared out hers, her reflection a pale, ghostly image against the dark glass, her heart a tangled knot of joy and dread. He walked her to the door of her apartment building, the space between them now a formal, yawning chasm. The easy intimacy of the past week had vanished. "Thank you, Lily," he said, his voice cool and distant. He was rebuilding the fortress around himself, brick by painful brick. "You were perfect tonight, for everything." The word perfect felt like a slap. She had been a perfect actress, a perfect part of his plan. He was dismissing the reality of what had happened between them, packing it away like a prop from a play that had ended. A sharp, bitter pain pierced through her. "It was my job," she replied, her own voice clipped and cold, a mirror of his. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. She turned and walked away without another word, not trusting herself to look at him. She didn't see the flash of hurt in his eyes before his mask of indifference slammed back into place. The weekend was a special kind of torment. Lily paced her small apartment, the sapphire dress hanging in her closet like a painful accusation. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the press of his lips, the desperate strength in his arms. She had allowed herself to fall for a man who had only ever seen her as a means to an end. The realization was a slow, creeping agony. She had broken the one rule she had set for herself. She had let her heart get involved. On Monday morning, she walked into the office with a heavy, settled resolve. She had spent the weekend crying, but her tears had washed away her indecision, leaving behind a hard, painful clarity. She could not go on like this. She walked directly to Christian's office. He was on the phone, but he looked up as she entered, his eyes widening slightly at her determined expression. She didn't wait for him to finish his call. She walked to his desk and placed a single white envelope on the polished mahogany surface. It landed with a soft, final thud. He ended his call abruptly. "What's this?" he asked, his voice wary. "My letter of resignation," she said. Her voice was surprisingly steady, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her. He stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. He looked up at her, his face a mask of disbelief. "Resignation? Why? The deal is all but closed. Your bonus?" "This isn't about money, Christian," she cut in, her voice trembling now, the facade of her composure beginning to crack. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and traitorous. "I can't do this anymore. I can't sit outside your office every day and pretend that nothing happened. I can't pretend that kiss on the terrace was just part of the act." She took a ragged breath, the final, painful truth spilling out. "And I can't pretend that my heart isn't breaking right now." He sat frozen in his chair, the letter lying untouched between them. He looked utterly paralyzed, his face pale with shock. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Lily, wait," he finally managed, his voice a hoarse whisper as he started to rise from his chair. But she was already turning away. She couldn't bear to see the pity or, even worse, the indifference in his eyes. She walked out of his office, her head held high, leaving him alone in the sudden, crushing silence. The vast, sunlit room, once the center of her world, now felt like a tomb. And he, the king in his castle, had never looked more alone. A week passed, or perhaps it was a year. For Christian, time had lost its meaning. His world, once a meticulously organized clockwork of meetings and deadlines, had devolved into a gray, formless fog. The office, his kingdom, felt like a mausoleum. Lily's absence was not just a void, it was a physical presence, a black hole that sucked the air and light out of every room. He had hired a temporary assistant from the top agency in the city. She was ruthlessly efficient, her resume was impeccable, and she anticipated his needs with a cold, robotic precision. She was, by all objective measures, a perfect assistant. And he couldn't stand her. She never remembered that he preferred his coffee black before his first meeting. She didn't know to screen his calls from his overbearing aunt on Tuesday afternoons. She didn't have a quiet, calming presence that could soothe his temper before he even realized he was losing it. She wasn't Lily. Christian was a mess. He walked into a board meeting and called his CFO by the wrong name. He missed a crucial lunch with a potential investor because he had forgotten to check his own calendar, a task Lily had always managed flawlessly. He found himself staring at her empty chair, the silence from her corner of the office a deafening roar. He felt a constant dull ache in the center of his chest, a phantom limb pain for a part of himself he hadn't known existed until it was amputated. He had told himself he needed her for her efficiency. That was a lie. He needed her for her light. He needed her for the way her quiet smile could cut through his darkest moods. He needed her. On Friday afternoon, an email with a single, triumphant subject line landed in his inbox. "Ishikawa, it's done." He opened it. The language was formal, congratulatory. The Pacific merger was secured. It was the single largest achievement of his professional career, a victory that would cement his father's legacy and double the value of his company overnight. It was everything he had ever worked for. He stared at the words on the screen. The deal is closed. He felt nothing. An absolute, profound, and terrifying emptiness echoed through him. The victory was hollow. It was a beautiful, gleaming trophy in an empty room. There was no one he wanted to share it with. The one person whose quiet, proud smile he wanted to see was gone, and it was his fault. He slowly crumpled the printout of the email in his fist. He walked to the vast window of his office. A torrential rain had begun to fall, the sky weeping as if in mourning. The city below was a blur of gray streets and hazy lights. And in that moment the truth struck him with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He had sacrificed her for this. For a piece of paper. For a number on a balance sheet. He hadn't wanted to win a business deal. He had wanted to win the girl who saw the man behind the CEO, the girl who held his secrets, the girl whose heart he had shattered for the sake of his pride. He had let her go. A desperate, primal urgency seized him. He spun around, his eyes wild. He didn't think. He just acted. He grabbed his car keys from the desk, ignoring his suit jacket, ignoring the frantic call of his new assistant as he stormed past her desk. He ran through the lobby, not waiting for the elevator, taking the stairs 2 at a time. He burst out of the building's front doors and into the pouring rain, not bothering with an umbrella. He had no plan. He had only a single desperate certainty that burned through the fog in his mind. He had to get her back. The sleek black sedan, now caked in mud and grime, was a wounded beast tearing through the storm. Christian drove for hours, his hands gripping the steering wheel with a desperate intensity. The rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers was a frantic heartbeat counting down the seconds he had already lost. He didn't care about the speed limits, the blinding rain, or the treacherous country roads. His entire world had narrowed to a single point on a map, the small, white house with the sprawling porch. When he finally arrived, night had fallen. He stumbled out of the car, his expensive suit soaked through, his body trembling from a mixture of cold and raw, unadulterated fear. He looked like a man who had lost a war. He navigated the muddy path to the front door, his heart pounding in his throat, and knocked, his knuckles rapping sharply against the wood. The door swung open. Lily stood there, bathed in the warm, golden light from inside. She was wearing a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked soft and calm, and a world away from the life he had forced her into. Her eyes widened in shock, her mouth parting in a silent gasp. "Christian," she breathed, her voice a whisper of disbelief. "What are you doing here? You're soaked." He just stared at her, drinking in the sight of her. The carefully constructed words he had rehearsed in the car, the logical arguments, the business-like propositions, they all evaporated. All that was left was the raw, ugly, beautiful truth. "I was a fool," he said, his voice a ragged rasp. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead and streamed down his face, mingling with the tears he didn't even realize he was shedding. A complete and utter fool. He took a staggering step closer, not caring that he was dripping water all over her grandmother's clean porch. "I closed the deal," he choked out. "The Ishikawa deal. It's done. I got everything I thought I wanted, and I stood in my office, and I felt empty. It was all empty, Lily. Because the only thing that matters, the only person who matters, wasn't there to share it with me." His voice broke, thick with a desperate, ragged emotion. "I don't need you to pretend to be my wife for one night," he said, his gaze locking with hers, his green eyes burning with a desperate fire. "I need you to be my partner, my friend, my everything. I need you for all the nights for the rest of my life." He saw the flicker of disbelief and fear in her eyes, and he knew he had to give her all of it. The whole, terrifying truth. "I fell in love with you, Lily Barnes," he confessed, the words torn from the deepest part of his soul. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was when you told me about your dream of a little cafe. Maybe it was when you trusted me in that dance. Or maybe it was the first day you ever walked into my office and brought light into my sterile world. I don't know when, but it happened." He stood before her, stripped of his pride, his power, his carefully constructed defenses. He was just a man, soaked to the bone, hopelessly in love, and completely at her mercy. "It's the realest thing I have ever felt in my entire life," he whispered. He didn't move. He just stood there, shivering in the cold, relentless rain, waiting for her to deliver his sentence. For a long moment, Lily just stared at him, her mind reeling. He stood on the porch, a titan of industry brought to his knees by a storm both outside and within. The rain dripped from his hair, his designer suit was ruined, and his eyes held a raw vulnerability that mirrored the confession he had just laid at her feet. Her heart, which she had so carefully tried to shield, ached for him. With a soft gasp, she broke from her trance. "You're freezing," she whispered, her practical nature taking over. She reached out, her hand closing around his icy one, and pulled him inside, out of the raging storm. The warmth of the house enveloped them. From the living room, Lily could see her grandmother watching them, a quiet, knowing smile on her face, before the old woman discreetly turned and disappeared deeper into the house. Lily wrapped a thick, soft towel around his trembling shoulders. He looked lost, a shipwrecked sailor washed ashore. She led him to the kitchen, the cozy, familiar heart of the home, and sat him down at the small wooden table where she had spent her childhood. She busied herself making tea, her movements automatic. Her mind was a whirlwind. His words echoed in her ears. "I fell in love with you." It was everything she had secretly, hopelessly dreamed of hearing. But the chasm between their worlds was still there, vast and terrifying. She placed a steaming mug in front of him, her fingers brushing his. He wrapped his cold hands around the warmth of the ceramic. He didn't look at her. He just stared into the mug as if the answers to the universe were swirling in the tea leaves. Finally, she sat down opposite him, the small table feeling like a vast ocean between them. "Christian," she began, her voice quiet but steady. I don't know what to say. You live in a world of private jets and billion-dollar mergers. I'm just a simple girl. My biggest dream is a cafe with mismatched chairs. How could a life between us possibly work?" He finally looked up, and the certainty in his eyes cut through all her doubts. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "It doesn't work without you, Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's what I've learned this week. My world is just a collection of expensive, empty rooms without you in it. It has no color. It has no warmth." He leaned forward, his gaze intense, pleading. "I don't care about the money. I don't care about the deals. I swear to you, I learned more about what happiness feels like while I was hammering a nail into your grandmother's fence than I have in 10 years of sitting in a boardroom. My world isn't a penthouse in the city, Lily. My world is wherever you are." Tears began to stream down her face, silent and warm. But this time they were not tears of heartbreak or of sorrow. They were tears of overwhelming, terrifying joy. The walls she had built around her heart crumbled, washed away by the sheer, undeniable force of his love. "I fell in love with you too, Christian Fairmont," she whispered, the confession a soft echo of his own. A look of profound, breathtaking relief washed over his face. It was like watching the sun break through the clouds after a long, dark storm. He stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. He framed her face with his hands, his thumbs stroking away her tears. He leaned down and kissed her. It was not like the desperate, frantic kiss on the terrace. This was a kiss of homecoming. It was soft and gentle, and filled with the quiet promise of a new beginning. It was a kiss with no pretenses, no audience, no lies. It was just truth. It was just them. And in the warm, quiet kitchen of her grandmother's house, it was more than enough. 6 months later, the afternoon sun streamed into a chic, minimalist office in downtown Manhattan. Christian Fairmont, a man who could decide the fate of a multinational corporation with a single word, was staring intently at 2 small squares of fabric. "I'm not sure, Lily," he said, a deep frown of concentration on his face. "Does the champagne feel too formal? Or is the eggshell too plain? Lily laughed, a bright musical sound that filled the room. She leaned over and kissed his cheek. It's just a napkin color, Christian. No one will notice. I'll notice, he said, his expression dead serious, before a slow smile spread across his face. He tossed the fabric swatches onto the wedding planner's desk. We'll take the eggshell. Their life together was a study in beautiful contradictions. They were building a new world, a seamless blend of his universe and hers. He spent his weekends in the country, trading his tailored suits for jeans and learning the names of the birds in her grandmother's garden. She, in turn, had brought warmth and color to his stark, minimalist penthouse. She had filled it with plants, with books, with the scent of her baking, transforming his glass and steel fortress into a home. He had, without her even asking, hired the best financial advisors to help her draft a business plan for her cafe, supporting her dream with the same fierce dedication he applied to his own company. The wedding planner, a woman with a kind smile and an efficient clipboard, cleared her throat. Now for the invitations. I'd love to include a little of your story, a romantic touch. How did you two meet? Christian looked at Lily, a mischievous glint in his green eyes. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Our story, he began, his voice smooth and warm, started as a business arrangement, a high-stakes negotiation. He smiled, and it ended with the single best merger of my entire life. He then proceeded to tell the planner a beautifully edited version of their story. He spoke of a brilliant, unassuming assistant who had captivated him from afar, of a fateful dinner where he discovered the incredible woman hidden behind a professional facade. He painted a picture of a slow, inevitable romance, of two different worlds colliding to create something new and wonderful. He transformed the chaos and deception of their beginning into a modern-day fairy tale. Lily listened, her heart swelling with so much love it felt like it might burst. He had taken the messy, complicated truth of their past and polished it into a memory that shone with nothing but love. He had protected her, even in the telling of their story. As the planner jotted down notes, Lily leaned close to him, her lips brushing his ear. You forgot the best part, she whispered. He turned to her, his brow furrowed in mock confusion. Which part is that? The part, she murmured, her eyes sparkling. Where I said yes. The day of the wedding arrived, not with the pomp and circumstance of a high society event, but with the soft, golden light of a perfect autumn afternoon. There was no opulent ballroom, no sea of reporters. The ceremony was held in the sprawling, sun-dappled garden of Lily's grandmother's house, the place where Christian had first felt the pull of a life he never knew he wanted. The air was filled with the scent of late-blooming roses and the gentle hum of happy conversation. Lily's grandmother, her face glowing with a radiant pride, walked her down a simple aisle lined with wildflowers. In the front row, Mr. Ishikawa and his wife, who had become genuine friends, sat beaming, their presence a quiet testament to the strange, wonderful journey that had brought them all here. But Lily only had eyes for the man waiting for her at the end of the aisle. Christian stood under an arch of intertwined willow branches, and the look on his face was one of open, unshielded adoration. The cool, guarded CEO was gone, replaced by a man whose love for her was a tangible force, a brilliant light that seemed to warm everyone around him. When it was time for the vows, Christian unfolded a small piece of paper, looked at it for a moment, and then tucked it back into his pocket, a small smile playing on his lips. I had a speech prepared, he began, his voice clear and strong, resonating with a deep, unwavering emotion. He looked directly into Lily's eyes. But the truth is much simpler than that. He took a deep breath. Lily, you came into my life to help me close a business deal, and you ended up saving me from a life that was polished and successful, but completely empty. I've learned since meeting you that my best moments weren't signing contracts or closing mergers. They were dancing with you in an empty boardroom, eating cake on your grandmother's porch, and waking up next to you every morning. You are my home. I love you. Tears of joy streamed down Lily's cheeks as she began her own vows. She reached up, and to the surprise of everyone, gently slid the simple platinum wedding band from her own finger, the ring he had bought for her in that exclusive jewelry store months ago. She had worn it every day since their reconciliation. "This ring," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she held it up, the metal glinting in the sun, began as a part of a lie. It was a prop, engraved with a word that felt too big and too permanent for our arrangement. Always. She looked at Christian, her heart in her eyes. "But you taught me the true meaning of that word. You showed me what it means to love someone always, through storms and silence and fear. Today, this ring is no longer a lie. It's a promise." She placed the ring into his palm, her hand closing over his. "So I give it back to you now, so you can place it on my finger for real." She smiled through her tears. "Yes, Christian. Always." 1 year later. The scene opens not with the hushed quiet of a boardroom, but with the cheerful sounds of a bustling cafe. The hiss of a steam wand, the clinking of ceramic, and the warm murmur of happy conversations. A beautifully carved wooden sign hanging over the door reads, "The Lily Pad Cafe." The cafe is a perfect reflection of its owner. It's bright and warm, with mismatched vintage chairs, shelves filled with well-loved books, and the intoxicating aroma of fresh coffee and cinnamon. Lily, her face glowing with a serene happiness, moves behind the counter with an easy, confident grace. She is in her element, the queen of her small, perfect kingdom. In a cozy corner booth, Christian sits with his laptop open. But he isn't working. His eyes, full of a soft, unwavering adoration, rarely leave his wife. The tense, formidable CEO has been replaced by a man at peace, a proud husband, content to simply be in her light. A young couple enters the cafe, their faces a mask of nervous tension. They sit at a nearby table, their conversation a hushed, anxious argument. Christian watches them for a moment, a knowing smile touching his lips. He closes his laptop and walks over to their table. "Trouble in paradise?" he asks gently, his voice kind. The young man looks up, startled. "I'm about to meet her parents for the first time," he confesses, his voice tight with anxiety. "I'm terrified I'll say the wrong thing." Christian gives his shoulder a reassuring pat. "A little unsolicited advice?" he says. "Don't try to be anyone but yourself, and more importantly..." He glances across the room at Lily, his expression softening. "Just look at her, really see her. When you do that, everything else falls into place. It's the only thing that truly matters." The young man stares at him, then at his girlfriend, a look of dawning understanding on his face. "Thank you," he says genuinely. Christian smiles and walks back to his booth. A moment later, Lily arrives with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Playing marriage counselor for the young and in love?" she teases, her eyes sparkling. "Just sharing the secret to my success," he replies, his hand capturing hers, his fingers lacing through hers on the tabletop. He tugs her gently toward him, leaning up to press a soft, lingering kiss on her lips, a gesture of easy, everyday affection. "I love you, Mrs. Fairmont," he says against her mouth. "I love you too," she whispers back, her heart full. She slides into the booth beside him, their shoulders touching. They sit together in comfortable silence, sipping their coffee in the warm, beautiful world they built. It was a world that had started with a desperate plea and a well-told lie, but had ended here in a cozy cafe, built on the simplest and most profound truth of all: love.